Welcome back to Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre. This is your host Basil Nightingale with a question for you. Why is it that there are so many ghost stories and weird tales, coming from a place in New England called the Bridgewater Triangle? Perhaps the answer lies in those two words, New England. From the Old England, groups of separatists crossed the Atlantic Ocean to a place named Plymouth, way back in 1620, making it one of the oldest settlements in what is now called the United States. Those separatists left the Old England, to the New England, in a ship called the Mayflower. They were doomed, from the very start. They had no skills and no clue how to survive in the New England. Half of them died that first winter. The only reason that any survived was because of a kindly Native American chief named Massasoit. He took pity on them, giving them food, and the secrets of growing corn, and other staple crops. For about a half-century, these separatists fed from, and prospered from, the kindness of the chief. But shortly after he died, they made war on the tribe, and killed off most of the very people who saved their lives. King Philip, Massasoit's son, cursed these separatists as they slaughtered him, and his tribe. That's one possible explanation for the eerie tales that come from the New England. Our story today is a new tale, written especially for short story theatre by our producer Bill Russo, who lived in the Triangle for many years. Bill says this story is fiction, but is based on real-life incidents that occurred in one of the towns in the 200 square miles of southeastern Massachusetts, known as the Bridgewater Triangle.
Summertime in New England. It's not noted for having many hot days, but the month of July in the first year of the 2000s was a notable exception. At least that was the case in tiny Morton Grove, which is in the northern part of a section of Massachusetts known as the Bridgewater Triangle. My little four-room cottage at the edge of a murky pond was usually cooled by winds blowing in from the eastern woods, a parcel of several thousand acres under the management of the United States Forest Service. In the second week of that steamy July of the year 2000, there had not been a breeze for over a week, and not a single day when the temperature was less than 94. Or a night when it was cooler than 88 degrees. I had no air conditioner, no way to keep cool, other than a noisy old fan that rattled so loudly most of the time I shut it off. Suffering the heat was easier than bearing the racket of the blades hitting the sides of the housing of the bulky old pedestal fan, which stood almost as tall as my ceiling. I opened every window in my little house. There were only 4. One in the bedroom, another in a room that served me as an office, one in the kitchen, and one in the living room next to the front door. The front door was also the back door, because it was the only door. The back of my house consisted of my tiny office where I wrote mystery stories that were rejected every single month by Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine. There was also a small kitchen and a minuscule bathroom that not only had no door but also no window. Further, there was no bathtub and not even a shower, just a sink and a toilet. My shack had no cellar. It was set on a thin concrete slab, and the step in front of my door was barely 1 inch off the ground. My living room window was about 4 feet above scraggly grass that passed for a lawn in front of my house and on one side of it. The other side consisted of a gravel driveway. From the back, the hut gave way to a wooded section. In the front, my tiny house was about 15 feet from the road. We called it a road, but in reality, it was little more than a 1-lane dirt path that twisted through the grove for about 3 miles until it reached a paved roadway that became the main street of town. Just beyond that dirt road, some 50 feet in front of my house, was the shallow back end of the Nipmuc Bog. Nipmuc Bog. It was known for its murky water, the color of which is best described as tobacco-stained brown. There was a public swimming beach in that section of the bog, but I'd lived there for 10 years and I never saw even one person venture from the sand into the muddy water that hosted snapping turtles, large water snakes, and thousands of eerie horned pout. Horned pout. They're huge, ugly fish, mottled brown in color, with sharp, poisonous spikes jutting out from their heads and sides. As the weekend got nearer, it got even hotter. On Friday night, it was so intense that I shut off my television, and I shut off all the lights. I just sat on my couch, near the open window, fanning myself with a copy of the day's newspaper. The sweltering night seemed to have clamped a silencer on the entire town of Morton Grove. There was no wind to make the leaves chatter and the branches rustle. There was no breeze to prod the wind chimes hanging from the porches of the summer camps across the lake. There were no crickets, no hoots from owls, not a single bark from a dog or a meow from a cat. If there were any birds in the trees, they too were as quiet as a 1922 Hollywood movie. It was too hot for movement of any kind, too hot for movement of any kind, human or otherwise. And yet, from outside, I heard breathing, heavy breathing, non-stop, heavy breathing. The sound was so close, it seemed to be coming from right in front of my window. The darkness of midnight gave just enough light so that I would have seen a person standing at the window. I would have seen something. The breathing was so loud, there had to be something there. Something standing less than a foot away from the open window. Then there was a second set of breathing noises, heavy breathing. It was coming from me, and it was caused by fear and from nervousness. Creeping up to the window, I tried to calm myself down. I stood at the windowsill and looked out. There was nothing there. No animal, no bird, certainly no person. Yet the breathing was so loud. I was positive someone was standing right next to me. I pushed my arms through the open window and I waved them around in the outside air, expecting to touch whatever was making the breathing noise, but there was nothing there. But there was something there. The loud breathing continued. I don't know how long it lasted, but at least 5 minutes, maybe 10. Finally, the breathing sound began to drift away slowly towards the Nipmuc Bog, which on that night was emitting a particularly foul smell. I closed my windows and lay down on my couch. The walls of my tiny living room, barely 8 feet wide by 10 feet long, were not made of plaster anymore. they had turned into the iron sides of a pressure cooker. At least it seemed so to my frazzled brain. My clothes were soaked through with perspiration, and wisps of steam flowed from my shirt as though I were a Thanksgiving turkey being baked for holiday dinners. I finally fell asleep. I fell asleep, or perhaps it was more of a coma than sleep. 900 minutes. 900 minutes. That's how long the days are in Morton Grove, New England in summertime. 900 minutes. 15 hours. Leaving a respite of only 9 hours when the blazing hot sun does not shine. Just 9 hours of darkness. 9 hours, which should have been an oasis from the sweltering heat. But in that summer of 2000, there was no relief. The next evening, Saturday night, was just the same as the day before. The oppressive heat again forced me to shut off my television and all of my lights. Extinguishing them did not affect the temperature. It was still hot. But it seemed to make the sweltering atmosphere slightly less torturous. Once again, a few hours after sunset, I heard the breathing, faintly at first, but louder as it came closer, ever closer. I knew now for certain that the heavy-breathing creature, whatever it was coming from the swamp. Ever moving, slowly it advanced to the dirt road in front of my shack. With no more speed than a turtle, it crept past my mailbox on top of a metal pole, as well as the newspaper tube on a separate post that faithfully received the daily copies of the Morton Gazette. The ghostly breather crossed over the dirt road, leaving in its wake swirls of dust at regular intervals as its invisible feet plodded along from the bog to my windowsill. I stared at the little dust clouds, trying to figure out if there would be footprints left behind, muddy prints, pressed into the dirt road by those invisible feet, perhaps still wet from the muddy pond. In a moment, the heavy breathing was coming from less than an inch away from my open window. Seconds later, it seemed to enter my shack and stop right in front of my nose. It was so loud and so close, I was certain I would smell the breath of the spirit or creature or whatever it was. I sniffed around. The heavy breathing continued inches away from me, but it left no smell, no odor, but the breathing continued. All through the rest of that summer of the year 2000, each night saw a repeat walk by the invisible breather. I spoke to no one about it, for I had no close neighbors. And my only friends were really just acquaintances who I worked with at the ironworks. But I did not see them all that summer because I was on layoff. I was stuck at the bottom of the seniority list in a town where jobs are so scarce nobody ever quits. The only time you ever move up is when somebody dies, and there are a few deaths around here. Everybody's so damn healthy. So every year I stayed at the bottom of the seniority list and was laid off at least half the time. That summer of 2000, I only worked 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks was when the company went on its annual 2-week shutdown for vacations. I got called back for those 2 weeks, not to do my regular work of welding and metal fabrication, but to be part of a cleanup crew. Given the job of doing all the dirty jobs, the grunt work, the rotten work that people higher up on the seniority list did not choose to do. So I had no distractions to take my mind off the creature who showed up every night, scared me half to death, hung around for an hour or so, finally drifted off back to the Nipmuc bog where it apparently lived. Or perhaps lived is the wrong word. I should say where it existed. In the middle of August, the boredom of the days and the tension of the nights were leading me down a path that I was certain was going to direct me to the Taunton State Hospital for the Insane. To try to get my mind off the invisible breather, I decided to paint my living room walls. Having something to do, that would help me. Hank's hardware store in downtown Morton Grove is the only place for miles around that sells paint. So I went there on a Monday morning. I went to Hank's just to get the paint. But since Hank is also the chief of police, I spoke to him and told him the whole story of the invisible ghost who stands at my window every single night and never speaks, just breathes heavily. Sometimes for an hour or more before it slinks back to the bog. Hank listened to me, and I could tell he didn't believe a word I was saying. Well, Bill, I gotta ask ya if you've been hitting the jug a little too hard these days. I know there ain't much going on in town right now. Things are real slow. But if I get the idea somebody's trying to cook up ghost stories to get the town up in arms, I just might show that somebody what I got down in the cellar. You know, don't you, Bill, that my cellar is where I keep my paint, and there's also 4 jail cells down in that cellar. And if I was to think somebody was off his rocker, I might give him one of them cells rent-free. If somebody was to keep talking crazy talk about a visible ghost, I'd make it my business to give him one of them cells. I guarantee you that. Well, I got out of that combination paint store and police station as quickly as I could, given Hank's views of my mental state. As I beat a quick retreat through the front door, Hank pleaded with me. Don't go away, mad! Let me show you some paint before you go. Guy with a fresh coat of paint on his walls might not be totally crazy. I threw a nasty look at Hank, who looked kind of funny because he was wearing his white painter's bib overalls and his white painter's jacket with his police chief hat on top of his head. I really didn't have anything against Hank, but it just seemed kind of crazy that the town would have a paint store owner as its police chief. But that's the way things are in Morton Grove. The selectmen appoint the police chief, and one of the selectmen was Hank's son-in-law, another was his brother, and his cousin was also on the board, so Hank was always guaranteed 3 of 5 selectmen would always vote his way. Still, he wasn't a bad guy, and there was hardly ever any crime in Morton Grove. I put up with the nightly appearances of the invisible ghost all the rest of the summer. I was getting used to it. After several weeks of being up close to it, without it ever harming me, I began to suspect. I began to have an inkling that maybe it was not evil. Maybe it was like me, kind of lonely. Other than the time I talked to Hank in the paint store police station downtown, and during the 2 weeks I did the crap work at the ironworks during shutdown, I had not spoken to anyone all summer. Nobody. When I went to the store to buy my food and such, I rarely said anything more than hello or goodbye. The only time I ever saw anybody to talk to was in the midnight hour when the invisible breather came. I began to converse with him sometime around the end of August. By the middle of September, I found that I actually began to look forward to the stillness of night. When at my window, I would hear "Hello, pal. How you doing tonight?" "Good." "Hey, that's good. Me too. Me too. Still awful hot, ain't it?" "Hey, so what do you do all day? I expect you spend a lot of time swimming in Nipmuc Bog. Hey, don't the horned pout and the snapping turtles bother you? Could it be that you are the spirit of one of those poison fishes?" "Nah, I don't think so." "Hey, thanks for coming to visit, pal. I do like talking with you, but I wish that you'd talk back instead of just breathing all the time." This continued for another week or so until a cold spell hit. We had a deep frost overnight and 2 inches of snow the next day, which was towards the beginning of November. Even though it was freezing out, I had my living room window wide open for my friend that I could not see, but I could hear. But he, she, or it did not come. All through that winter, I was alone every night, and I missed hearing that thing at the window. I missed it more than I missed anything, except maybe when my mom and my dad passed a long time ago. I got called back to work in the ironworks, and I was lucky enough to have a couple old guys retire, so I moved up a couple spots in seniority. But not enough to avoid the usual summer layoff. By June 15th, I was spending every day at home, and except for getting called back at shutdown time in July, I would not work again until probably late September or maybe October. That was okay, though, because as soon as the weather got hot, I opened all 4 of my windows, and sure enough, at midnight, I heard a welcome and familiar sound. My pal, my buddy, my only friend was back. Every night through the long summer, he, she, or it visited with me. It still didn't speak, but that's okay, because I talked enough for the both of us. When the cold weather came, once again my invisible friend stopped visiting me, and I got depressed. Although I was a little happy when I got called back to work and found out the 2 old guys had died and 5 more retired, and I was finally going to be high enough on the seniority list to work full time. I even started getting overtime. OT. OT. Time and a half, baby. We got a new union contract and I was made a senior mechanic. The big raise gave me enough money so that I could have moved out of my shack into a far nicer home, but I did not. I saved my money, as much as I could each week. And so it went. Year after year, I kept moving up in seniority, my savings kept growing, and my invisible friend visited with me all summer long, but always stopped coming when winter approached. After 17 more years, I retired from the ironworks at the top pay grade. I got a really good pension, and I bought a nice little 4-room house in Green Gables, a little town near Miami in tropical Florida. My first winter there, I was enjoying the heat. On New Year's Day, after I had been in Florida for about a month, it was 86 degrees. 86 degrees on New Year's Day. While back in the Grove, everybody was freezing, and they were lucky if it was 20 degrees by the time of the afternoon sun. I had air conditioning in my new place, and I used it during the day, but at night, I shut off my TV, I turned off all my lights, and I remembered how much I enjoyed my talks with the thing at the window. The thing at the window. Well, I talked, and he, she, or it just breathed, just kept breathing. But it was my friend. The thing at the window was my best buddy, and although he, she, or it was not talking to me, it was still my only friend. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard something. It was my friend, and now I know why. Now I know why it stopped visiting me when the cold weather arrived. The thing at the window is a snowbird ghost. He, she, or it goes to Florida every winter. Well, now so do I. So I spend my summers in Morton Grove, where my pal visits at midnight. And then when the cold weather comes, we both head for South Florida, where my buddy visits me every night when I shut off the TV, turn out the lights, and throw open my windows.
There are spirits who walk at night, my friend. They are everywhere, even if you do not see them. But if you do see one, how do you know it will be evil? Why do people think all spirits and ghosts are evil? Why are people afraid of spirits? The next time you are visited by an invisible spirit at your window, instead of thinking that it is a dangerous monster, some spawn of the devil, just say hello, friend. For it may be a kind spirit, perhaps even the spirit of Christmas. On the other hand, it could be an evil spirit. But that's for you to find out. Good luck. And so closes The Thing at the Window, written especially for Short Story Theatre by our producer Bill Russo, who also played the part of the narrator. Bill reports that the story is pure fiction. Well, partly. Like most stories, there is an element of truth to this one. And we shall leave it at that. So long for now. Please remember to subscribe to our podcast. And like us on Facebook or YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I leave you with best wishes, and come back again real soon, won't you?